test. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started in exactly 5 minutes. Give some people a chance to get on. I'd be grateful if you shared this video around to people who you think and groups you think might be interested in or could benefit from learning MMT. At exactly 3:05, I'm going to start reading a post that I wrote today, and then as soon as that's done, then we're going to watch my full lesson from the MMT conference in New York from September, and then at the end of every chapter, we're going to discuss and answer questions. I've written a lot of notes about my lesson. I've learned quite a lot since giving it. And my goal is to give it again and again, keep improving it until there's nothing left to improve. I wonder if that's ever going to happen, honestly. And intersperse among my lesson, the introduction lesson, to do other things, such as a book club, such as doing more traditional kinds of stories like on the Jimmy Dore show, where he puts up, quotes and so on from articles. That takes me more time to do. I need more preparation for that. So in the meantime, I'm going to just keep giving my lesson again like I did on Real Progressives and keep improving it as best as I can and answer questions as best as I can. So please, I'd be grateful if you share this around. And in 3 minutes or 2 minutes, we're going to get started. The first thing I'm going to do is read a post, and then we're going to get started with the lesson. So thank you for sharing this around. I'm grateful. Citizens media means, social media. It doesn't exist unless people don't see it, unless we share it around. And no one is going to help us. So, okay, I'll get started in just about a minute. Okay. Okay, let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is read a post that I wrote today. I would like for this to be made into, a more formal article. I think it needs some work to do that, but I like what it is so far. So I posted this. The links are in the description, so you can see it for yourself. But I'm going to read what I wrote. So modern monetary theory reveals that, MMT reveals that, it is unnecessary to keep the people. MMT reveals that it is unnecessary to keep the people unemployed in order to control inflation. MMT reveals that it is unnecessary to raise taxes on the wealthy or us in order to pay for federal programs. MMT reveals that it is unnecessary to reduce the military or any federal program, such as Social Security or Medicare, in order to pay for other federal programs. And finally, MMT reveals that reducing federal benefits in order to reduce our taxes does not reduce our taxes. It just reduces our benefits. Our governments are flush with resources and labor currently sitting idle or immorally or inefficiently used that could be used to help the people. So why are our governments choosing to do things that are harmful and unnecessary to the people? And why are they choosing to withhold critical needs from the people? Economists and their research must assume that our federal representatives and their economic advisors are working in good faith. This is necessary in order to properly and scientifically demonstrate on their own terms that their theories are flawed. It is our job as non-experts to then take these conclusions and to use them to educate, organize, and fight for the people. What MMT has revealed to me is that controlling inflation and preventing a ballooning deficit and debt and preventing raised taxes are not the goals. Rather, the fear of inflation, the fear of blowing a hole in the deficit, the fear of raised taxes, the fear of our national debt and its interest bankrupting our grandchildren. These are in fact the tools used to achieve the actual goals of keeping us unemployed and impoverished, just enough so we remain dependent on private industry and the wealthy for our survival, just enough so we can't afford to stand up to our bosses. Because if we did stand up to our bosses, we would risk our jobs, which risks healthcare coverage and other critical needs for our family, all of which makes it impossible for us to run for office. Because if we could afford to run for office, we could eject these corrupt and morally bankrupt politicians and replace them with ones that actually represent the people and not their super wealthy donors. Our representatives pretend to care about fiscal responsibility only as cover for not giving the people anything that might increase their power, because increasing our power even a little means decreasing their donors' power. This is what they are paid to do. Power is relative. The only way the powerful can stay powerful is by actively keeping the powerless powerless. What is most upsetting is how most people, including most progressives and Democrats, unknowingly fight to prop up this corrupt system. They truly believe that these economically inaccurate things make it impossible to give the people big programs. We spend most of our time discussing, arguing, and debating things that make no economic sense. We should instead be spending 100% of our time and energy organizing and demanding that our government give us single-payer health care, free college, forgiven student debt, a federal job guarantee, and fix our poisoned water. There is nothing wrong with disagreeing on policy. That is a good thing. There is a big problem, however, disagreeing on the reality, on how our economy actually functions. Right. Why is there no comments? I mean, enable live chat. All right. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to play my lesson. It says that live chat is available. I'm waiting to see the first comment. I don't even see the comment I just made. Okay, all right, let's start. Let's start the lesson. This is it. Oh, here we go. Okay. All right, let's start the lesson. I appreciate your sharing this around so people who want to see it can see it. People who need to learn MMT can learn it. Oh, wait. Oh, here. Monitor 2. Okay, here we go. Right, so I'm going to mute me and start the video. At the end of this lesson, I received feedback that resulted in some small but important corrections. These corrections have been integrated into the slides and the words that you see on screen. So, my name is Jeff Epstein. This is an introduction to modern monetary theory. I am with Real Progressives. You may know me on Twitter as Citizens Media TV. First, I would like to thank especially Rowan Gray and the Modern Money Network for allowing me to give this talk, and my own Modern Money MMT teachers, Jeff Ginter and Ellis Winningham. I want to thank Real Progressives and Steve Grumbine for giving me the platform and to access to a lot of really amazing people. And also to just the many, many supporters who have given me so much feedback in improving this lesson. I've given this pretty much every single week since the end of June, and although it's made an impact from the beginning, it has dramatically improved and sharpened since then. So first, I am not an expert. I am not an economist. So like many of you, I am a student. I never heard of modern monetary theory before February. Therefore, it is not my job to teach. That job is left to the experts and the economists. However, my one and only job is to help you understand all of the miseducation and the misconceptions that we have been taught for our entire lives. After your eyes are opened to MMT, it is time to send you off to the experts, and my job is done. So for those who want to know what MMT is but don't have time to listen to a lesson, I give them this elevator pitch. So modern monetary theory
or MMT, is the study of how our economy actually functions. MMT shows why the powerful always get what they want and why the people only get crumbs, nothing at all, or even less than that. MMT shows exactly how we can actually get the programs that we need to survive. And it also shows that our government can easily give us these things tomorrow if they wanted to, and they could have given us these things decades ago if they wanted to. The powerful have always known MMT. For war and for tax breaks, they just do it. No pay-fors in any of those bills. But when it comes to healthcare, education, forgiving student debt, a job guarantee, suddenly they forget about MMT. Suddenly it's, how are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? How are you going to pay for it? And the way that I like to sort of summarize this all up in a cheeky kind of way is MMT for the rich, rugged neoliberalism for the poor. Okay, so we're going to do this in 5 chapters. First, where does money come from? So you and I, we get our paycheck from our company. Most of us get a paycheck from our company. Some of us sell merchandise and we get money from the people who purchase that stuff from us. Patrons, monthly patrons, we might get monthly contributions or one-time only contributions. So we get it from our employers. We get the dollar from our employers. Where do our employers get it from? They get it from their customers. Those customers get it from their paychecks, and on and on and on and on. But the ultimate answer, what happened? But the ultimate answer is the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve creates the United States dollar. But they don't just create it because they want to create it. They are instructed to do so by the Treasury. The Treasury is instructed to do so by the budgetary process, which represents the numbers that are in laws that are signed by the president. Those laws were originally bills that were written by the Congress. So Congress is the ultimate answer of who creates the United States dollar. Through a series of steps, the Federal Reserve actually does it, but the Federal Reserve is at the command of Congress. So just to give a tiny bit of the details of how this works, the Federal Reserve creates the money, distributes that money to the state reserves distribute that money to the banks, the local banks. They put them in the bank accounts of companies who implement these laws, and then we get it for our paychecks. A critical distinction is that the Congress has no bank that they go to, that they ask for money. We go to a bank and we ask for money, and if they feel like we can handle it, they give us a loan. The Federal Reserve is the bank of the country, but they only work at the command of Congress. This is a critical distinction. There is no bank above the Congress. So Congress writes a number into a bill, and then that bill is signed into law by the president, and then through the budgetary process, the money is created. So for this example, this is a bill on Elizabeth Warren's congressional website. $2.7 billion for fiscal year 2019, same for 2020, same for the next and the next and the next. I believe that these are non-discretionary, so once this law is passed, that this money is created without voting or debate. So writing a number into a bill, I'll take questions at the end, forgive me. Writing a number into a bill is very similar to a child drawing a $1 trillion bill or a $100 bill on a piece of construction paper. It is very similar to choosing to tick up the score on a scoreboard. They can create the money because they want to create the money. The money exists because they want it to exist. So according to the Constitution of the United States, Article 1, Section 8, the Congress is the monopoly currency issuer. This means that they are the only ones in the world that are allowed to create the United States dollar. So the Congress and I'm going to say Congress and federal government sort of interchangeably. The Congress can create the dollar as much as it wants, whenever it wants, for whatever it wants, and it is the only one in the world that is allowed to do it. The Constitution, Article 1, Section 8. This is what declares that the Congress is the monopoly currency issuer, and also through a series of some Supreme Court cases further clarifies that they can create coins, bills, and electronic money. We are a fiat currency. Fiat means by decision or by decree. We can create the money because we decide to create the money. A fiat currency has a monopoly currency issuer, and the currency is not backed by anything physical, such as gold, and the currency is not pegged to any other economies. In August of 1971, the Nixon administration took the United States and a lot of other countries off of the gold standard. These other currencies are the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, England, and others. The European Union is a more recent fiat currency. Monopoly currency issuer. They create the money, the only one that's allowed to create the money. Everybody else and everything else is a currency user. So me and you and our families and our households and our companies, municipalities, which means states and cities, which means towns and cities, our states, and even other countries such as China and Russia. As far as the US dollar is concerned, we are all currency users. So currency users must get income in the United States dollar from somewhere, something, or someone else. We must get income before we can spend. Because we are not allowed to create the currency, and if we tried to do so, we would go to federal prison for counterfeiting. Congress, however, is the currency issuer. They are the one and only source of the United States dollar. They don't need income before they can spend. To the Congress only, the terms, to the currency issuer only, the terms spend money and create money are exactly the same. So when you say the Congress created $100, that is exactly the same thing as saying the Congress spent $100 into the economy. So the Congress doesn't require income, which means that they don't need to borrow from anyone or anything. We don't need to borrow from China because we create the money as much as we want, whenever we want, for whatever we want. And China doesn't create the dollar anyway. They have to get it from us. And again, there is no bank above the Congress. The federal government also does not need to get money from taxpayers because we don't create the currency. Taxpayers don't create the currency. We have to get it from the government. But even just hypothetically, even if we could get it from taxpayers or from China, there is no difference between saying Congress created $100 and spent it into the economy, or Congress created $50 and spent it into the economy, and then somehow collected income of $50 and then spent that also into the economy. There is no difference. There's no benefit in collecting anything. They can just create it. Federal taxes do not fund federal spending. Federal spending funds federal taxes. So what do I mean by that? When the United States government was first formed, when the Constitution was just signed, but before the first dollar was created, it is not possible for the federal government to come to the people and say, you owe us $100 in taxes and it must be paid in the United States dollar, because then they turn to the government and they say, what's a United States dollar? You have never given me one, I have never seen one, so how can I possibly pay your taxes? The people must be given the dollar before they can pay taxes. So another way of saying this is, the people do not fund the government funds the people. Chapter 2.
Okay. All right, so that is chapter 1. And I've written quite a few notes on this chapter. So so here's some thoughts that I have about this. First of all, the pay for in Elizabeth Warren's bill, it's not pay for, the appropriations in Elizabeth Warren's bill, I would really like to show examples of these are bills that benefit the powerful, and here are just the appropriations, and likely non-discretionary in most of them, and certainly with no taxes in them. And then compare that to a bunch of bills, especially H.R. 676, Medicare for All, and some others that are that benefit the people, and show how they have taxes in them, taxes pay-fors in them. So that's one thing I'd like to do. More specific path. Oh, so regarding how money specifically gets to the people, it is hard to think backwards of I get a paycheck and I get that from my company, the company gets it from customers, and on and on and on back to the Federal Reserve. It is hard to really internalize, to really get a handle, get your head around the specific path that money takes. Like, what bills does it come from? What budgets does it come from? I would like to understand that better. So a number is written into a bill by Congress, clearly influenced by lobbyists and so on, and corporate interests and money in politics. But ultimately, a number is written into a bill by Congress. That bill is passed into law by the president, and then through the budgetary process, the money is created for that law, that is the bill that is now a law. And then that triggers the Treasury, which triggers the Federal Reserve, and then I guess it goes to the regional reserves, and the regional reserves send it to the state reserves, and then to the banks, and so on. But it would really be nice to know a specific example of this, like what law it implements, and there is no bank above the Congress. The Congress is the monopoly currency issuer, and that means that the Congress is the god of the United States dollar. And there is no one above the god of the United States dollar. And if you are the god of the United States dollar, there is no reason for you to need income in that currency. That doesn't make sense. You don't need to borrow. You don't need to collect from taxpayers because you are the god of the currency. And regarding borrowing from China, I need to understand better of why specifically China does borrow from us. And I'm pretty sure that it has something to do with that this is simply our way of paying for the products that we import from China, that we pay for them with treasury bonds. But I don't really see the benefit of why would China want to do that? Why does China need to sit on this money in the U.S. Treasury, in treasury bonds? And, I understand that rich people are currency users, so they buy American products, and so they want to just keep getting free money, so bonds and treasuries allows them, it's just corporate welfare. And that means that China must also somehow want to purchase United States products, but purchasing to a foreign entity, to a foreign country, purchasing means I give you this physical thing, you give me this physical thing. It's trade. So I don't understand quite how the U.S. dollar benefits China. There were some Supreme Court cases, and I have never found the details of which specific ones they are, that take the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, that allows the Congress to create the currency. And these Supreme Court cases further elaborated that they can create physical dollars, physical coins, and electronic money. I know that these cases exist, but I don't know specifically which ones. I see some people are out there. If you have any comments, please join the conversation here. The European Union. The European Union is a fiat currency, newer than all the others. We became a fiat currency along with Canada and Japan and New Zealand and England and Australia in 1971. The European Union has not existed that long, but they are a fiat currency, and I wonder why. I asked earlier this week of why, if the European Union is a fiat currency and we are a fiat currency, why is the European Union falling apart? And we're not falling apart. I mean, we have enormous problems, but the country itself is not falling apart. The European Union is falling apart. And part of the answer that I received when I asked that question was that the federal government in the United States subsidizes the states, and the European Union puts a lot more austerity onto the states, and they don't allow them to borrow as much, or they don't subsidize as much, and so the states, the countries in the European Union, the members of the European Union, owe the central authority money. For example, Italy is now being put pressure on Italy. The EU is putting pressure on Italy to accept incredible austerity, such that 20% of the value of the Italian people. Valerie, listening and learning. Excellent, thank you. They're going to have to sacrifice 20% of their entire value, their entire savings, in order for the Italian government to fulfill this debt with the European Union. Finance. So we collect taxes because the law says that we must match income with outcome. So whatever we spend must be matched with taxes and borrowing. But that doesn't mean that these taxes are used for actually spending, the federal government spending. It's really no different than just a silly rule of, if I'm going to go out and spend $5 at a store, then I first have to collect 5 blades of grass. So if I don't have 5 blades of grass, I can't spend $5. If I only have 4, then I can only spend 4. I'm obviously not using those blades of grass for anything. But it is a human-created restriction that the government puts on themselves, that they must collect taxes and borrow in order to match their spending. The taxes and the borrowing is not used for anything. And this means that it's financed. It doesn't pay for anything, but the taxes and the borrowing finance that spending. Regarding no difference between $100 spent, between the government spending $100 and the government spending $50 and then collecting 50 and spending those. A reason that this doesn't make sense is because when you spend 50 and then tax 50 and spend those as well, that means that you're anticipating the effect, the inflationary pressure, if there is any. When you spend $100, the government can react to the consequences and tax back whatever is necessary based on consequences, based on whatever happens. When you spend 50 and then tax 50 and then spend that 50, if that were possible, then you're assuming what's going to happen. And it doesn't change the fact that you may end up still needing to be taxing back some more in order to correct inflation and deal with situations. Sounds like some NWO creepy shit. I'm not sure what NWO means. What else? Yeah, okay, so that's all the notes for this. That's all the notes for this. So we're going to go on to chapter 2, and then we will discuss that.
Chapter 2. The Pony for All Act of 2018. So Hillary Clinton, in her book, said to Bernie Sanders, "It's so nice that you want to give everybody a pony, Bernie. Everybody would love a pony, but how are you going to pay for it?" So that inspired Stephanie Kelton's article in 2017, and that article inspired this chapter. Good news, the Congress and the President have gotten together and they have decided that they will be giving every single American citizen, every man, woman, and child in the United States a free pony if they want one. And you and I are members of Congress, and it is our job to write this bill. So here is the current situation. We have 320 million Americans around, and we have approximately 500,000 ponies. Demand far outstrips supply. So we must make these things roughly equal. Demand must roughly equal supply, or we're going to have a very big problem. There's only one of two solutions. One is to increase supply, and one is to decrease demand, or some combination of the two. So we could decrease demand, but that goes against the whole point of this law, a Pony for All Act of 2018. So that doesn't really make sense. We could deport or kill hundreds of millions of Americans as well to decrease demand. We're not going to do that. So we are going to increase supply. We could import ponies from other countries, probably won't make much of a difference. We could create robotic ponies, probably won't make much of a difference. So the most obvious solution is to reproduce. So our current population of 500,000 ponies must be increased to 320 million. How do we do that? Well, the obvious solution is that mommy and daddy ponies are going to have to do their things over and over and over again. So we now have to understand, if we're going to figure out how long this is going to take, we have to figure out the gestation period for a horse, roughly 10 to 11 months. After giving birth, how quickly can the mommy do it again? Say roughly 2 months. So every cycle is about a year. So given these biological constraints, how long will it take to reproduce 500,000 to 320 million? Very roughly, we'll say 20 years. That's how long it's going to take. So now the population of ponies is exploding, and that has enormous consequences, because we can feed and shelter and care for 500,000 ponies, no problem. We've been doing it forever. But now the population is exploding, so now we're going to need many more supplies. More food, more water, more farms, fencing, shelter, horseshoes, caring for the land, which means we're going to need to educate millions of more blacksmiths and veterinarians and caretakers and breeders, which means that now we're going to have to distribute these things across the country, so trucking and shipping. So a new industry is being created with lots of new jobs, which is a wonderful benefit, but that is not the important point. Now it's 20 years later, and the people are going to pick up their ponies. We have the best staff, best people. It's not going to be chaotic. It's going to be perfectly organized. That's not a problem. But the people don't know how to take care of ponies, so we have to train them. Their homes are not prepared to take care of ponies, so we have to prepare them. So all of the resources, all of the supplies and services that we just spoke about now have to be reproduced at a micro level all across the country. And finally, what do we do when they die? So this is the full life cycle. This is what it takes to create this bill. This is what it takes to give every single American a free pony. It genuinely could happen, as silly as it is. It genuinely could be done. This is our bill. However, let's say someone comes in and says 20 years is not acceptable, it's got to be done in 5 years, okay? So we write a law that says it must be done in 5 years. We threaten the people and we say, if you don't do it in 5 years, you're going to have severe consequences. And we're also going to say, I know it's going to be hard, so we're going to throw $10 trillion at it. So what's going to happen? No amount of money or laws or threats can change biological processes. Can't change the best gestation period of a horse, doesn't change because you give them some money. No amount of money can change how fast all of these things are distributed around the country. No amount of money can change how fast we can educate millions of people to be veterinarians and blacksmiths and so on. And no amount of money can change how fast to prepare the people, training in their homes. This is the point. Nothing can make this happen quicker than 20 years. It is out of human control. To the federal government, the only thing that matters is real resources. To the federal government, money doesn't matter. When I say real resources, I mean raw materials, labor, technology, and time, because we can have those things, but we need time to make it happen, in this case, 20 years. So there's often an argument made against MMT, which we've heard a couple of times already today, that MMT says that we can spend,
Sorry, Google Chrome is crashing. I gotta restart just the browser. It'll take a moment. Sorry, Google Chrome is crashing. I gotta restart.
as much as we want without consequence, which I inaccurately have heard a couple of things, can make this happen quicker than 20 years. It is out of human control. To the federal government, the only thing that matters is real resources. To the federal government, money doesn't matter. When I say real resources, I mean raw materials, labor, technology, and time, because we can have those things, but we need time to make it happen, in this case, 20 years. So there's often an argument made against MMT, which we've heard a couple of times already today, that MMT says that we can spend, as much as we want without consequence, which I inaccurately said before. We can spend as much as we want without consequence. We can have everything we want, which of course is going to cause hyperinflation. Often this argument is done in bad faith. But if the Congress does not spend more money into the economy than our real resources can handle, our productive capacity, our capacity to produce more than that can handle, then there is no inflationary risk. In fact, in many cases, it is simply impossible to spend more money into the economy than our real resources can handle. And the problem is not worrying about inflation. That's not our real problem. Our problem is that we leave so many resources idle that could be benefiting the people. So much labor that is simply unemployed or unhappy, ready to do good work for the people, and we let them sit idle. That's the problem. And finally, we can tax back money to give the government extra space to spend more money. To the federal government, money doesn't matter. Only real resources matter. And if we can give everyone in the country a free pony, then why in the world can't we give Americans free health care and college? And why can't we forgive student debt when, directly speaking, there are almost zero real resources involved in doing so? Next chapter. Why do we collect federal taxes?
Okay. All right, so that's Chapter 2, the Pony for All Act of 2018. Yeah, so a very important question that I had never considered before, which Ben brought up to me, my partner who was here last week, is that the important questions, the important biological questions on how you can expand 500,000 ponies to be 320 million is, what's the gestation period of a pony? How long after a pony is born can a mommy do its thing again and again? But there's a third critical question which I had not considered, which is, how old does a pony have to be in order to have a pony, in order to give birth and have sex? I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the answer is. But those three questions are what dictate how long the formula of 500,000 expanding to 320 million, plus, some are not going to survive and so on. How long do they live and whatever. So it may even not be realistic to give every single American, aside from stupid and ridiculous, it may not even be possible to give every single American a pony without it taking 100 years. I don't know what the answer is, but something along these lines. Every family, every other person, lottery, whatever. Also considering that not everybody might want one. But the question of how old does a pony have to be in order to give birth is an excellent question that I had never considered before. So, yes, cloning. So I said, how do you reproduce 500,000 to be 320 million? The obvious answer is reproduce, biological reproduction. You could also create robotic ponies, and you could also clone. But given our current situation and our current technological abilities, it is very unlikely for these three methods to make much of a dent at all. They'll certainly do something, but not much. There's an additional consideration, which is not critical because it's such a silly scenario. But Gary Fraser brought up to me in our interview when I gave him this lesson when we met, that city homes are not prepared to deal with ponies. How do you don't bring ponies up elevators and put them into apartments? That doesn't make sense. So if you really push this idea, then you start to think about, well, do you have places within cities where you'll have basically community gardens, but community pony centers? Is there a way to share somebody else's place where they'll hold your pony for you if you really push this idea to its extreme? Creating money inherently causes inflation. Yeah, so the point of this chapter is to show that money doesn't matter to the federal government, only real resources matter. And so people will say, well, if money doesn't matter, then we can just create money infinitely. We can create as much money as we want, and it will not create a problem. And that's not what we're saying. Creating money itself does not, in and of itself, create inflation, let alone hyperinflation, because you need to also consider how many resources do you have available. So we are funneling money to the 1%, and meanwhile, the 99% of people are desperate for more stuff, for more, and they're willing to do the work for it. So there are plenty of resources and labor that currency could be created for without causing a problem. There's also taxing. So there's many more things than just spending money itself. Anything else? No, that's pretty much it for chapter 2. Let's move on to chapter 3. So this chapter is 16 minutes long. This is by far the longest chapter in the presentation. So this is going to end at around 4:07, something like that. So see you on the other side. I'll be in the comments then.
Next chapter. Why do we collect federal taxes? So when I give this lesson one-on-one to people, before I begin, I ask them, why are federal taxes collected and what are they used for? And the answer that they almost always give me is that they pay for things. They give us Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. They pay for the military. They pay too much for the military. They pay for federal employees' salaries, FBI and Social Security employees and the politicians and the president. They help us fix our bridges and give us infrastructure and fix our roads. But we now know that this is not true. So why do we collect federal taxes? There are three major reasons that I'm going to talk about today. First, the purpose, and then two important uses. Excuse me, I'll get a drink. The purpose of collecting federal taxes is to drive the currency and drive the economy. And to almost all the people that I speak to, they have no clue what that means. When I first heard it, I had no clue what that means. And how could we? Because we've never been taught this. But before we go into what that means, I want to talk about the purpose of a government. The purpose of a government is to compel the people to use the real resources at its disposal for the benefit of society. And money, the US dollar, is the incentive that the government gives to the people for doing so. Money is a less violent form of coercion than a gun to the head or threats. So some of that money is taxed back, but the rest of it, the people get to do whatever they want with. There are no strings attached. It is an interest-free grant. So when Britain went into the countries that they tried to colonialize, how did they get those people to use the British pound? When the United States began, how did they get the people in the 13 colonies to use the dollar? And how they did it, because they were perfectly happy using the British pound at the time. And what they said to the people was, you will pay taxes, and you will pay them only in our currency. Because if you don't, you will face severe consequences. Penalties, confiscation, jail. Severe penalties for not paying federal taxes. That is what forces the people to care about the money. That is what forces the people to find a job so they can get more of that money because they have to pay federal taxes in that money. The federal government, however, only cares about its real resources and productive capacity. So I have heard a number of times the US dollar has value, people say, because people have faith in the US government. But what that is more accurately stated as is that the US dollar has value because people have faith that the US government will do something really severe if you don't pay your federal taxes with the US dollar. Critical use one. So that is driving the currency and driving the economy. Now we're going to go into critical use one, controlling demand. So at the end of the Depression through World War II, the United States only went off of the gold standard. In 1971, a whole bunch of countries did. During World War II, car manufacturers stopped making new cars and they used all of their real resources, steel, rubber, plastic, paint, so on. Instead of making new cars, they made tanks and boats and planes and artillery. No new cars were produced during the war. However, roughly speaking, demand for new cars was about the same. Before we move on, we need to define inflation because it is often misused. The term is often misused. Inflation is not when the price of bread goes up. Inflation is not when the price of gas goes up. Inflation is not when the price of everything in an entire industry goes up. Inflation is when the price of everything Everything available for sale in the US dollar goes up and continues to go up. It is a macroeconomic phenomenon. Inflation is a big deal. So we had a lot of new people that wanted new cars, and we had no new cars to offer them. We must make these roughly equal, or we're going to have a big problem. The only two solutions are to either increase supply or decrease demand, or some combination of the two. In this situation, however, increasing supply is simply not an option. We have decided that fighting the war is the only thing that matters. So therefore, we must decrease demand. So how do we do that? We can compel the people, we can force them, or we can entice them to stop buying new cars. What are some examples of compelling them using a stick instead of a carrot? We could raise taxes, we could make new laws or regulations, and we can threaten them. That's not what happened. We used a carrot. We tried to entice them to stop buying new cars. What is more appealing than a new car? So people use their money for that instead. And during the war, the answer is patriotism. The government offered the people war bonds. They were marketed as support the troops, support the war effort, but as we now know, they didn't pay for anything. They didn't actually pay for things, even though it was very strongly implied that they do. So here's an example war bond or bond. 10 years, 3.25% annual interest. So if you purchased one of these war bonds in 1945 for $1,000, in 1955 it would mature and you would get back $1,377. War bonds removed the people's money from the economy and reduced demand for new cars, avoiding this big problem. So bonds are very similar to taxes. Both remove money from the economy. Bonds are voluntary, taxes are compulsory. Bonds have a specific length of time that the money leaves the economy. Taxes do not. They leave the money for taxes leaves the economy for infinite length. They never come back. And bonds offer a bonus of interest. But there is one crucial difference between bonds and taxes. Both bonds and taxes remove money from the economy. But when you pay $1,000 in your taxes, you write $1,000, your name on a tax return, you mail it into the federal government. The federal government puts that tax return into a folder in a filing cabinet or in a folder on a computer, and they go through your bank, they go through your bank into your bank account and lower your bank balance by $1,000. Nothing happens on their side. They don't raise anything by $1,000. That money does not move from your bank account to the government's bank account. However, they have your tax return and they know, they've notated on your tax return how much you've paid. They know how much you've paid and when you've paid it, but they don't have that money. It simply disappears from you. So when Congress writes a number into a bill and it's signed into law by the president and through the budgetary process, money is born. On the other side, the opposite side of that is when it is taxed back, it dies. And again, I want to emphasize we are only talking about federal level, not state, not local. So taxes are the opposite of money creation. And if you think about it, it has to have an opposite. Otherwise, we're going to accumulate infinite money and lose control very quickly. So taxing is like a child erasing that bill off of a piece of construction paper. It is like ticking down the score on a scoreboard to 0. The money disappears because we want it to disappear. Critical use number 2 for federal taxes. And it's called imposing moral decisions. Some of the following examples are more applicable to state and local. However, the concepts are exactly the same. So we could increase taxes to we could increase taxes to discourage behavior by making it more expensive. We could decrease taxes to encourage behavior by making it less expensive. Examples of increasing taxes to discourage behavior. We could discourage use of vices, alcohol, gambling, smoking, drugs. We could discourage activities that cause pollution and climate change by raising taxes on those activities. We could decide how much do we want to raise taxes? How much do we want to discourage it? Do we want to stop it, or do we want to just slow it down and raise it a little bit? We could also decrease taxes to encourage behavior. We could decrease taxes on gym memberships. We could decrease taxes on activities that prevent pollution and climate change, such as solar panels and electric cars. And there's one more example of discouraging behavior going back with raised taxes. And that is to increase taxes on the super wealthy to discourage immoral levels of income inequality. For example, we as a society could decide on 3 thresholds, and we as a society could decide on the specific numbers for those thresholds. And let's say that this is what we came up with. The top threshold is $1 billion. Everything above that, if you have $1 billion or more. And we say that the consequence of this is that if you have that much money, you can buy politicians and you can create the laws in your favor, and that is simply unacceptable. And we decide that that is called obscene wealth. And we're going to tax almost all of it. However, we are only going to tax the portion above $1 billion, not below it. We are only talking about the obscene portion. Threshold number 2, below that, 500 million to a billion. And this threshold is not quite as obscene. However, it is really difficult to become even more wealthy unless you harm other people in the process by extracting off of their well-being. So we decide that this is simply too rich. It's not obscene, but it is too rich, and we're going to tax a lot of it. And finally, $0 to $500 million. If you have that much money, enjoy it. That's the American dream. It's reasonable. So we're going to tax a modest amount of it, but you can basically keep it and enjoy it. An important aside. MMT is knowledge. MMT does not say whether or not we should tax the rich. It also does not say how much we should tax the rich by. I, as a progressive, however, take the knowledge of MMT and say, yes, we must tax the rich. Our corrupt politicians take the knowledge of MMT and choose to give tax breaks to the millionaires. They use the knowledge of MMT to help the rich. They don't want to help the people, or they don't help the people. We can choose to do with that knowledge or not do with that knowledge whatever we feel is right. You don't blame medicine or choose not to learn medicine because Nazis took that knowledge and chose to conduct horrible experiments. What you should do is learn MMT and cure people. Medicine. You should learn medicine and cure people. You don't blame MMT or choose not to learn MMT because our corrupt politicians choose to take that knowledge and help rich people instead of the people. You should learn MMT and help the people. And besides, you can't fight the cheaters if you don't know the rules. So I, as a progressive, say, yes, we must tax the rich. We must tax the rich to reduce their power, which would therefore increase our power. We must tax the wealthy because it is moral and just and equitable and right. We cannot and should not tax the rich because we need their money. Yet that is all we ever hear. Not only shouldn't we tax the rich to get their money, it is impossible to tax the rich to get their money. Yet this is all we ever hear. I, as a progressive, also say that we should reduce the military, not MMT. I do. Because we are the bullies of the world. The military is supposed to protect the people. We must reduce the military because it is moral and just and right. We should not and cannot reduce the military in order to get that money so we can have health care or education. All federal programs are funded by created money. And these are numbers that were written into bills that are already on the books. Money is created for federal programs whenever it is needed every single time. Whenever a Social Security benefit is paid out, the currency is created. Whenever Medicare benefits and all other benefits, federal benefits are paid out, currency is created. Whenever federal employees, their salaries are paid, currency is created. Same with military funding. Federal employees examples, for FBI, military, judges, congressmen.
Okay. Regarding MMT being descriptive or prescriptive, MMT is knowledge. It is up to us to decide how we use that knowledge. There is a very important clarification about that. MMT is descriptive. However, there is a prescriptive element regarding it, which is the federal job guarantee. 2 weeks ago, the MMT podcast with Christian Riley and Patricia Pino posed a question that I had regarding, is MMT prescriptive or descriptive? And is the federal job guarantee part of MMT? And posed this question to Australian economist Bill Mitchell, who's one of, if not the most prominent MMT economist in the world. And he said that the federal job guarantee is a core part of MMT. It is not separate. It is part of MMT. Beyond that, MMT is descriptive. This is as best as I understand at the moment. So the federal job guarantee is an enormous solution to many problems. And that, oops, what? Okay. Is an enormous solution to many problems, and that is involuntary unemployment. And when you solve involuntary unemployment, you start to match wages to production, which allows the people to stand up to their bosses. You create the federal job guarantee creates a floor of minimum living wage, minimum wage, and minimum benefits, and even treatment, and even jobs are local. So this allows people to stand up to their bosses in the private industry, because I can get a job local that pays $15 an hour. It won't give me raises or promotions, but it'll be a stable minimum living wage job. And so the people now are empowered to stand up to their bosses, which means that the private industry must now compete with the federal job guarantee, compete with public jobs. And if they want to attract those people into the private industry, they need to do better. They need to pay better than $15 an hour, or they need to provide some sort of benefit that appeals to those people, so they choose the private industry. But the most important part of the federal job guarantee is the macroeconomic effect on inflation. The standing up to your bosses part of it is good as a progressive. I think that's great, but that is not the macroeconomic effect. What the macroeconomic effect is that it raises wages and makes them much closer to matching their production. It gives people a way to be able to afford things, and the people to be able to afford things, not just us as individuals, but the people. So the federal job guarantee is part of MMT. It is descriptive. It is prescriptive for that one critical piece. The first dollar, as I wrote in the comments, the first dollar was not created until 1796. Before that point, the states had their own currencies. And I don't quite understand how, but rich people had to bail out the government because the government was in debt to foreign entities and they weren't collecting taxes. I don't quite understand that yet, why that's the case, but the first dollar was not created until 1796. The dollar was created and federal taxes were collected for the first time, and that power was taken away by the states. Up until that point, the states had their own currencies. World War II. War bonds did not pay for World War II, for the war. Taxes did not pay for the war. We just got out of the Great Depression. Nobody had any money, so there was nothing to tax. So the war was funded by created currency. And only after the war was underway did we start to offer war bonds to the people. And those war bonds didn't fund anything. It just took those people, it made those people postpone spending that money until after the war. The talk with Fidel Kaboub and Graham Elwood, I introduced them. He took my spot as I was doing interviews with Graham and I ran out of things to say. And so Fidel Kaboub took my place, and the talk that they had is an excellent one. And he addressed that the war wasn't paid for with taxes and bonds, and he also went through the scenario of war bonds in a more deeper way than I did here. So yeah, I want to understand more specifically how the war was not funded by taxes and how bonds fit into it. Yeah, this whole chapter is generally correct, but it's pretty shallow, and I really want to start to understand all the details of all of this stuff. Better federal level moral decisions, and I think just one more thing. Yeah, so taxes. If taxes funded spending, it has enormous implications. Number one, if you reduce benefits, that implies that your taxes go up. That is a fallacy. If you reduce benefits, it doesn't affect your taxes. It just lowers your benefits. It might indirectly affect your taxes based on the consequences that has, but there's no direct correlation between we reduce these benefits and therefore your taxes can be raised. It's just a way to screw you. Reducing your benefits does not raise your taxes, federal benefits. If taxes fund spending, if they did, they don't. If they did, then that implies that if they did fund spending, then that implies if taxpayers fund the government, then who funds the government the most? And that would be rich people. If taxpayers funded the government, then the most funding would be given by the rich, and therefore they would have the most say in it. So that is another reason that we need to get away from taxpayers funding the government. Valerie just said federal level moral decisions. The feds have crap morals. Yeah, well, they're corrupt. They're corrupt. But that doesn't change the fact that whatever their moral decisions are, they can use taxes to impose on them. For example, they just gave enormous tax breaks to millionaires and pittance tax breaks to the people, and our tax breaks are 7 years. They go out of they stop being effective in 7 years, and tax breaks for millionaires are permanent. That's their moral decisions. I'm not saying that their morals are great. I'm saying that taxes are used to impose whatever your morals are. Yes, they're using them very badly. We need to get people in there who can use them for our benefit. But the point of what I'm saying here is that taxes are used to impose moral decisions. It is nauseating. You're right. Valerie says that's nauseating. Yes, but we must learn what taxes are used for so we can replace them and start using them for the right way. This is a matter, the fact that they don't use it to help the people is not because of economics, it's because of morality and corruption. They are using MMT to impose their moral decisions, which are help the rich, screw the poor. But we, again, as I said, you can't fight the cheaters if you don't know the rules. These are the rules. They know the rules really well, and they use them to their benefit and to our deficit. We have to get people in there who will switch that around and start helping the people get money out of politics. Okay, so that's it for this chapter. Oh, other ways of solving inequality. Taxing the rich is very important, but it only takes back some of what has been stolen from the people. The people are producing more and more and more for less and less and less, and the salaries and the income of the super wealthy keeps making them even more super wealthy. They're effectively stealing from us. So taxing the rich taxing the rich takes money away from the wealthy, which stops them from stealing as much, or it penalizes some of what they've stolen, but that money doesn't go to the people because federal taxes aren't used for spending, and therefore federal taxes collected from the rich people just disappear. They don't go to anybody else. So taxing the rich lowers the wealth of the rich, but it doesn't stop their fire hose of an income, and it doesn't stop stagnant wages, and it doesn't make the people more wealthy or more, having more access to resources. We must stop their fire hose of income, their unjust income, to stop this problem. And yes, taxing them in addition to that would be good, but this is income inequality, not wealth inequality. Yes, wealth inequality is a problem, but income inequality is the problem. That's the problem that must be solved. We must stop this inequality of income going forward. All right, so next chapter. Yes, please continue asking questions. I would love to answer them. Starting chapter 4. This chapter is 9 minutes long, so this will end at about 4:28 EST.
Next chapter. The big lie. The big lie is all we ever hear. They say that money, for the federal government, money is exactly the same as money to me and you, as currency users, currency issuer. They say that the economy for currency issuers for the federal government is exactly the same as the economy for me and you. A budget for the federal government is exactly the same as a budget for me and you. This is the big lie. To say that these things are different between me and you compared to the federal government is an understatement. There is simply no comparison. Yet all we ever hear is that these things are exactly the same. And every other lie is based on this big lie. The national debt and borrowing. So you and I go to a bank and we ask for a loan. We say, can I please have $100? They analyze our history and they decide, sure, you can have $100. We are instantly in debt to the bank for $100 plus interest, 100% of that money. The bank will do whatever it takes to get that money back. There is no equivalent situation for the federal government. a reminder of the federal government's purpose. A government's purpose is to compel the people to use its real resources for the benefit of society, and money is the incentive that people get to do so. So when the Congress creates the currency, they are the source of the currency. What does it even mean to say that a currency issuer is in debt? What does it even mean to say that the currency issuer has borrowed money, needs to borrow money? Who does a currency issuer borrow their debt? Who does a currency issuer owe their debt to? Who do they borrow it from? No one else can create the United States dollar. There is no bank above the Congress. And to those who say we must pay back the debt, or our country is going to go bankrupt, our grandchildren are going to go bankrupt, to them, I want them to explain, I think they should be pushed to explain exactly how, logistically, step by step, how do you pay back that debt? How do you pay back the national debt? And to who? Our politicians, media, academia, and so-called experts constantly panic about this national debt that we must pay back. They talk about how it will bankrupt our nation and our future generations, and yet we never hear any protests or demands from this mythical bank that we supposedly owe this money to. So here's the technical definition of the national debt. The national debt is the total of all money that the Congress has spent into the economy since our country began that has not yet been taxed back. That's the technical definition. But here's the same thing in an easy-to-understand version. The national debt is the total amount of money of every American citizen's, every currency user's, investments, bank accounts, and wallets. The national debt is the American people's value. And if you truly wanted to pay down the national debt, if you truly wanted to get it down to zero, first of all, we could write a $21 trillion bill on a piece of construction paper. I don't know who we would give it to, but we could do that. But if we really wanted to get it down to zero, then by definition, that means we have to empty out every single American citizen's investments, bank accounts, and wallets. The big lie, a balanced budget, surplus, and deficit for me and you is exactly the same as these things for the federal government. So for me and you, balanced budget, surplus, and deficit. At the beginning of the week, we budget $100 for food, gas, children, everything. With a balanced budget, at the end of the week, we ended up spending $100, exactly what we budgeted. And we were fiscally responsible, and probably a little lucky. With a surplus, we budgeted $100 at the beginning of the week. At the end of the week, we spent $85. We have $15 left over. We can give ourselves a treat. We could treat our family. We were even more fiscally responsible, and probably a little more lucky. A deficit. You and I, we budget $100 at the beginning of the week. At the end of the week, unfortunately, we had to spend $120. We went over budget. We were fiscally irresponsible and probably had some bad luck. A deficit for me and you forces us to dip into our savings, use credit, take out a loan, call in favors, depend on charity, beg and steal. And now let's go into opposite world. A balanced budget, a surplus, and deficit for the federal government. The federal government spends $100 into the economy so people do what benefits society. And with a balanced budget in April, they tax back $100, all of it. What do people have left in their pockets after they pay their taxes? They have nothing. They have no money to invest or spend or save or survive. Yet this is what we are told is called fiscally responsible. A surplus. The government spends $100 into the economy so the people do what benefits society. And in April, they tax back 120. What do the people have in their pockets? They have less than zero. They can't even pay back their taxes with the money that the government has given them, let alone survive. But this is what is called even more fiscally responsible. And finally, the deficit. Government spends $100 into the economy, or $1 billion, whatever it is. Spends $100 into the economy, so that people do what benefits society. In April, they tax back 30. What do the people have in their pockets? They have $70 after paying their taxes. Now they can invest and save and spend and survive. And this is called fiscally irresponsible. The federal deficit is the people's income. It is the only thing that gives the people value. Yet this is the only thing that we are told is fiscally irresponsible. We are going to blow a hole in the deficit. And what they're saying is, it is irresponsible to give the American people value. The federal deficit is not just important, it is critical to the functioning of society. Without a deficit, people have no incentive to do what benefits society. The government might as well put a gun to their heads. And why would they spend $100 into the economy, given the purpose of a government, if they're just going to take it all back? Without a federal deficit, Americans are forced to dip into their savings, use credit, take out loans, depend on charity, beg and steal just to survive. And this puts pressure on states and cities who depend on that tax revenue from their citizens because they do need income. They are a currency user just like us. I would call the federal deficit our national income. I would call the national debt our national value or savings. Last chapter. Racism.
Okay, fourth of 5 chapters. Whoops. Okay. So, Valerie, you said that their morals are not great. The morals of our federal government are not great, and I agree. But I'm not talking about our government. I'm talking about our economy and what our economy allows us to do. Given the rules of a baseball game, you can play it well, you can cheat, you can be mean, you know. We're not talking about what people do with those rules and with this reality. We're talking about the rules, because if you don't, you can't fight the cheaters if you don't know the rules. Yes, our government is using them for very not great reasons if you're not wealthy. But it doesn't change the reality of what MMT is, what our economy is. MMT demonstrates, it proves that we can indeed provide for the people. And that therefore reveals that those politicians and experts in academia and media that say that we can't afford to provide for the people, what does it say about them? Incorrect, lying, corrupt, morally bankrupt, whatever it means. MMT shows the truth about our economy, and because of that truth, it reveals something about our media and politicians and academia and so-called experts. The national debt. Give me a moment. So here is our national debt. Oops. Can I? Oof, that's not good. Let me do that again. Open with Paint. Here we go. So here is our zoom in. Oh, just is not good. All right, full screen. Here we go. Not the greatest, but here's the national debt. Oops, I got to make this. Can I make this bigger? I think I can. Yep. All right. So this whole thing, this whole shape, is the value, the total value of the American people. The national debt is only the gray part at the top. Everything else is user-to-user transactions, and what that means is when I get a bank loan, the bank gives me money if they decide that I'm worthy of having that money, and I immediately owe them. So my value also has a mirrored debt because I owe 100% plus interest. Same with stock transactions. When I purchase a stock, I give money to them, their value goes up. They give me a stock which gives me the right to their future income. So there is a debt and an asset. But that's not true with the national debt. The national debt, that little gray part at the top, is the money that we get to have that we don't owe any debt for. It is an interest-free grant, effectively. We get to do whatever we want with it. So the Congress created this money, gave it to us, taxed back a little bit of it, but the rest of it is the national debt, and that is our savings. That is the debt-free value of our that is the debt-free portion of the American people's value. So paying off the national debt means eliminating all of the debt-free value of the American people. So paying off the national debt means getting rid of all of our value that we do not currently have a debt for. In other words, paying off the national debt puts the people into debt to private industry. And calling the national debt a debt is extremely misleading. It is the portion of the people's value for which we have no debt. And that's what they're doing in Italy right now. They want to strip 20% out off of the national debt, meaning 20% of the people's savings that they don't owe any money for. And I think that's it. So student loans, so examples of user-to-user transactions is student loans, bank loans, stock transactions, mortgages, purchasing a safe deposit box from a bank. Anything that doesn't involve the federal government is a user-to-user transaction. All right, let's go to chapter 5. This is 10 minutes long. So this is going to end at about 4:46.
Racism. Racism. Racism is a tool to tear the people apart. Xenophobia is a tool to tear the people apart. Don't be angry at the boss that chose to hire an immigrant over an American, screwing both of them. Be angry at the powerless immigrant. Classism is a tool to tear the people apart. Homophobia and sexism, these are all tools to tear the people apart. Economic ignorance is a tool to tear the people apart. For our entire lives, we have been taught the perfect storm of misinformation to get everybody fighting with everybody. There is nothing wrong with disagreeing on policy. That is a good thing. But there is a big problem when we disagree on the reality of how our economy actually functions. Examples of how we fight. Progressives and Democrats say, please raise my taxes because I want my taxes to go to health care. Don't raise my taxes for war, but I want to give everybody health care. Please raise my taxes. I'm a nice person. It's not just for me. And that triggers a huge population of people that are genuinely terrified of raised taxes. They are convinced that it will bankrupt themselves, their families, their businesses, and the whole country. So they stand against our big programs because they are convinced that it will raise our taxes, and most progressives and Democrats agree that it will raise our taxes. And it won't. So this makes no sense, yet we fight over it. Take money from the rich. Bernie Sanders still says, although he is doing better, Bernie Sanders still says we must tax the rich so they pay their fair share in taxes, so we can have infrastructure. Which triggers a huge population of people that say, how dare you penalize success? Who do you think creates the jobs anyway? Take money from the military. We must reduce the military. Just imagine what we could use that money for. And that triggers another population of people to say, how dare you jeopardize our national security, and how dare you jeopardize our troops? And none of this makes economic sense, because we don't need to take money from the powerful. We don't need to raise taxes necessarily for these big programs. Most progressives, the Young Turks, for example, Bernie Sanders, what they do so well is they clearly articulate what is wrong. We don't have health care, and this is why that's so wrong. We don't have free education, and this is why that is so wrong. And on the other side, they clearly articulate how the world could be better if we had health care, and this is why, if we had education, and this is why. They help us envision the world that could and should be. But the one thing that most progressives and most Americans, I'm mixing things up. The one thing that most progressives get wrong is when we actually try to get these programs, the one critical step at the very end to actually make these things happen. Why don't we actually have any of these programs that we need to survive? These things that we have been talking about and preaching about for decades. The answer is that we spend most of our time arguing and debating over and analyzing these economically inaccurate things as if they are more important than the genuine benefits that these programs will provide to us, like survival. We incorrectly believe that these economically inaccurate things are a prerequisite to getting what we need. So our progressive leaders and the media, along with most progressives and most Americans, sabotage our actually getting these critical programs that we need to survive. So when we march onto Congress and demand single-payer health care, we demand it tomorrow. Our Congress member turns to us and says, oh, I wish I could give it to you. There is nothing more in the world that I want to do than give it to you. I know how much you want it and need it, how much it will alleviate your suffering, but I can't. I can't give it to you because of the debt and the deficit and fiscally responsible. How are you going to pay for it? And almost all of us fall for this pay-for trap, and it is a trap and a trick. Our federal politicians ask us, how are you going to pay for it? And most of us go back to the drawing table and try and figure it out. We try, and we spend most of our time trying to figure it out, coming up with better numbers. And every time we do this, it just makes the people fight more. The truth is, they just don't want to give it to us because they're paid to not give it to us. They hide behind these economically inaccurate things to pretend that it's somehow out of their control. Here is the technical answer to how are you going to pay for it. The answer is we are a fiat currency. If we have the real resources to do it, then you could create the money to do it if you wanted. That's the technical answer. But this is the answer that I believe should be given to the how are you going to pay for it question. We will pay for it by getting you out of office and replacing you with someone who will never ask that question again. They will do whatever it takes to just make it happen. And until that day, 100% of our energy will be spent making your life a living hell until you either get out of office or you give it to us. Why? So why don't we have single-payer health care? Because it has nothing to do with health care. First, they want to profit off of us. They want to profit off of our sickness and our suffering and our death. But that's not the biggest thing. What's bigger than that is that it chains us to our jobs. And therefore, we can't stand up to our bosses because if we dared try, we risk health care for our whole family. But that's not the biggest thing. In my opinion, the biggest reason that we don't have single-payer health care is that it chains us to our jobs and makes it unaffordable to leave our job and run for office. Because if we did that, then we could get our corrupt politicians out of office and create a government that actually cares about the people, more than it cares about money and power and donations. That's why we don't have health care and free college and forgiven student debt and a federal job guarantee. Power. Power is relative. The only way that the powerful can stay powerful is to actively keep the powerless powerless. We don't need to fight the powerful. We just need to stop fighting ourselves. We don't need to take money from the powerful. We don't need to take power from the powerful. We just need to empower ourselves. There is nothing wrong with disagreeing on policy. That's a good thing. There is a big problem, however, in disagreeing on the reality of how our economy actually functions. Thank you. So I'm going to leave this up. If you have some questions, I don't know how much time. You'll stop me when it's too long. But I'm not talking about this, but I put this at the beginning and at the end, and I hope that you can see how critically this relates to the situation.
Okay, so that's the full lesson. So our federal politicians, which is reinforced by our media and academia and so-called experts, they all say we must be fiscally responsible. So we can't give you this big program in order to be fiscally responsible, because the goal is to be fiscally responsible. And the tool that we're doing it is, unfortunately, to not give you this particular program. Inflation. We must control inflation. We can't have out of control inflation. That's our goal. Our goal is to control inflation, and therefore we have to keep some people unemployed in order to control inflation. Preventing a ballooning deficit and a ballooning debt. That is the goal, to prevent a ballooning deficit and a ballooning debt, and therefore we can't give you this particular program because doing so would balloon the debt and the deficit, and we just can't have that because that is too important. But the truth is that it's the opposite. The truth is that the goal is not fiscal responsibility. The truth is that fiscal responsibility is cover for achieving, is the fiscal responsibility, pretending fiscal responsibility, the fear of inflation, the fear of debt, the fear of our national debt and a ballooning deficit, the fear of our taxes going up. That is not the goal. That's the tools. Those are the tools to achieve the true goal, which is to simply not give us stuff. Because if they gave us big programs, then that would give us power. And if we get power, then that means by definition that they get less power instantaneously. So fiscal responsibility is not the goal. Fiscal responsibility is cover. That is the tool to achieve their goal, which is to keep some of us unemployed, which is to not give us big programs, because that gives us power. Other things that I gave examples of the reasons that we fight. How we fight, examples of how we fight. We must raise taxes, and so Democrats say, oh, please raise my taxes so we can have health care for everybody. I'm a nice person for everybody, not just me. And then other people say, don't, you're crazy. Your programs aren't going to raise my taxes. But the truth is that our programs don't have to raise anybody's taxes at all. So we're fighting over something that makes no economic sense. And meanwhile, what's really important is getting health care for all or free college. We're not even talking about, let alone even considering getting it. And same with decreasing the military, which we don't need to do in order to collect their money to use it for other programs. And a third example, which I don't recall at the moment. But there's also, the other side of it, we must lower our benefits in order to lower our taxes. And that's just as inaccurate, because lowering benefits, lowering federal benefits does not have any direct effect on our taxes. So we might think that lowering our federal benefits, Social Security, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, so on, we must reduce those in order to lower our taxes, but that is just as economically inaccurate, because reducing our benefits has nothing to do with it. Doesn't directly affect our taxes at all. All Social Security benefits are paid with created currency. So therefore there is nothing to steal or borrow or go broke. So lowering those doesn't change any of that. It still is created currency. None of it is funded with taxes. So therefore lowering those benefits has no direct effect on taxes. So that's pretty much it. I think I'm going to end by reading the post that I did one more time that I wrote today that sort of very closely relates to all of this, and then we'll call it a day. We'll call it a week. So here's my post from today, and the links to this post are in the description. Modern monetary theory, MMT, reveals that it is unnecessary to keep people unemployed in order to control inflation. MMT reveals that it is unnecessary to raise taxes on the wealthy or us or anyone in order to pay for federal programs. MMT reveals that it is unnecessary to reduce the military or any federal program, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, in order to pay for other other federal programs. And MMT also reveals that reducing federal benefits in order to increase taxes, reducing federal benefits in order to reduce our taxes does not reduce our taxes. Our governments are flush with resources and labor currently sitting idle or immorally or inefficiently used. And these resources and labor could be used to help the people. So why are our governments choosing to do things that are harmful and unnecessary to the people? And why are they choosing to withhold critical needs from the people? Economists and their research must assume that our federal representatives and their economic advisors are working in good faith. This is necessary in order to properly and scientifically demonstrate that on their own terms that their theories are flawed. It is then our job as non-experts to take these conclusions and use them to educate, organize, and fight for the people. What MMT has revealed for me is that controlling inflation, preventing a ballooning deficit and debt, and preventing raised taxes are not the goals. Rather, the fear of inflation, the fear of blowing a hole in the deficit, the fear of raised taxes, and the fear of a national debt, of a ballooning national debt bankrupting our children, and the interest on the national debt bankrupting our children. These are in fact the tools used to achieve the actual goals of keeping us unemployed and impoverished, just enough so we remain dependent on a private for-profit industry and the wealthy for our survival. Just enough so we can't afford to stand up to our bosses. Because if we did stand up to our bosses, we would risk our jobs and our health care and major benefits for our entire family. All of this makes it impossible for us to run for office. Because if we could afford to run for office, then we could eject these corrupt politicians and these morally bankrupt politicians and replace them with people that actually represent the people and not their super wealthy donors. Our representatives pretend to care about fiscal responsibility only as cover for not giving the people anything that might increase their power, because increasing our power, even a little, by definition means that they are decreasing their power and their donors' power. This is what they are paid to do. Power is relative. The only way that the powerful can stay powerful is to actively keep the powerless powerless. And what is most upsetting to me is how most people, including most progressives and Democrats, unknowingly fight to prop up this corrupt system. They truly believe that these economically inaccurate things make it impossible to give the people big programs. We spend most of our time discussing and arguing and debating things that make no economic sense. We should instead be spending 100% of our time and energy organizing and demanding that our government give us single-payer health care, free college, forgiven student debt, a federal job guarantee, and fix our poisoned water. There is nothing wrong with disagreeing on policy. That's a good thing. But there is a big problem, however, disagreeing on the reality of how our economy actually functions. And I just did a tweet, and I want to show you. So I just did this tweet. Yep. All right, here we go. There you go. So we hear about, fiscal responsibility. That's the only way to ward off the mythical beast of economic chaos. And so we as a people would rather suffer and die and go bankrupt than to dare even think about this mythical beast of economic chaos. It's never happened, but we are so conditioned to believing that it's going to happen if we dare ask for, let alone actually get, Medicare for all and so on, all these big programs, that we actually resist our own getting of these programs because we fear it's going to cause economic chaos. This mythical beast that has never happened because we won't dare try. We won't even get in the boat, let alone worry about this falling off this cliff, this edge of the earth that doesn't exist. So, okay. So that's it for today. So let's see. I agree. Just have some friends. I live in rural Texas, Valerie says, who are cheering for the wall and saying dumb stuff like vets before immigrants. And I'm like, the money can be there for both. That's the point. That's the point. Because if we create the currency and as long as we have the resources, then there's no reason we couldn't give to both, as long as we have the resources to do so. But when we assume that taxpayers fund the government, then they get to choose what those taxes go for. And the rich have the biggest say of all because they contribute the most taxes. So if taxes fund the government, then we have a single pile of money, and therefore we must make choices. But we're not talking about a single pile of money. We have a single pile of resources, and the resources that we have are so plentiful that it would take an incredible amount of energy to run out of them. So yes, we could do vets and immigrants at the same time, no problem at all, because we have the real resources to do so. Same with Flint, the water in Flint. So we're not going to fix the water in Flint until, we only have a single bucket of money, and therefore we have to triage clean water. And are poor, disadvantaged people going to get that water first? No, the rich people are. But knowing MMT reveals the fact that we can just create the currency, they could fix poisoned water like that all over the country, no problem. There are plenty of people, plenty of pipes, plenty of PVC piping to do that right now. So what's the benefit of not doing it? Someone is getting something out of not doing it. I need a clip of these past few minutes because it's short and to the point about MMT. Give me the beginning and the end time. Once this video is over, Valerie, please give me the beginning and end timestamps of when you're talking about, and I'll see what I can do. I'm not exactly sure what portion you're talking about. So give me the beginning timestamp and the end timestamp, and I'll see what I can do. So, okay, that's all for now, Valerie. Thank you for your questions and your input. Thanks to the whatever mysterious other people that are out there. And next week, I'm planning on doing this lesson with some of my comments improved. I'm going to do it, and I'm going to try and add in some of the improvements that I've been discussing today. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. It was nice talking with you, Valerie. Good night.